At the time of signing day, the Nebraska 2020 recruiting class was considered by many to be one of the greatest high school cycles by the Huskers in well over a decade. The Big Red landed 12 total 4-stars, cultivating what was known as the Flo-Braska connection. But what was once considered to be a massive success by Nebraska and Scott Frost turned out to be one of the biggest failures in Husker football history. So in today's video, we're going to dive back into the Nebraska 2020 recruiting class. We're going to go over every single player that committed to the Huskers, how their career went with the Big Red, if they transferred where to, what they're doing now, and everything else you need to know. So really quick, loaded Nebraska history episode. Hit that like button if you're fired up. And really quick, if you support the channel, it takes 2 seconds. Please hit that subscribe button for daily Husker football content. Best family here on Nebraska YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much. But without further ado, let's jump into it, looking over what was considered to be one of the greatest classes in the past decade for Nebraska football. The 2020 cycle that turned out to be one of the biggest failures for Scott Frost in the entire Husker program. We're going to go from worst to first in this recruiting ranking. So we're going to go over every single player that committed to Nebraska and how their career went. And now let's get things started with the worst player in Nebraska's 2020 recruiting class. We'll go from worst to first, from low 3-star to high 4-star and some borderline 5-star prospects. This, of course, is Taman Lidham coming out of Orlando, Florida. Nebraska signed a lot of Florida players in this class. And as you're about to see, Taman Lidham was actually the most successful out of all of them. Now, that's not saying a lot. He played 4 years with the Huskers in high school. He had 44 tackles his senior year, 11 pass breakups, and 2 interceptions. And a lot of people in the Scott Frost coaching staff, they thought they were getting a gem. They thought they were getting somebody who was honestly under-recruited. He had good size, good speed. But throughout his Nebraska career, for 4 years, he never played. He really only played in the 2023 season, which was Matt Rule's first year at Nebraska. He had 12 total tackles. And then after that, entered the transfer portal going into 2024, landed with the Pitt Panthers. And in 2024, he started 3 total games, had 31 tackles, and is returning to Pitt this season for his 6th and final year of college. And he's projected to start for Pitt as one of the better corners in all of ACC football. So Taman Lidham, the first player that we'll talk about in this class, was actually one of the more successful players because it only gets worse from here. Jamari Butler was a mid 3-star prospect coming out of Mobile, Alabama, listed at 6'5", about 210 pounds out of high school. Now, he was a super raw prospect that the coaching staff, Scott Frost, he believed in him. He saw a lot of potential. He only played 1 year of high school football. And in that 1 year, he had 60 total tackles, 22 TFLs, 15 sacks, one of the more dominant players in all of Alabama. Now, he got to Nebraska in that 2020 class, and he said that it was a complete culture shock, that it was completely different than Alabama. He really did not like it here. He didn't like the people, but he said as time progressed, you really start to found Nebraska as a home, and he played a lot. In 2020, 2022, he really got on the field, played in all games, but most notably in 2023, that was one of his best seasons, and then 2024 started the majority of games, had a couple injuries, but on his entire career with Nebraska, had 7.5 sacks, was projected to be one of the best returning edge rushers in the Big Ten for Nebraska, but of course entered the transfer portal this last December and will be now with LSU starting for them in the SEC. Going on to the third player, this is Eteva Maga Clements, JUCO prospect, somebody who was very hyped up when he committed to Nebraska, was considered one of the best JUCO linebackers in America. Now, he played 3 seasons with the Huskers from 2020 to 2022 and played in almost every single game in that time span. He started 2 games in 2022 with Scott Frost, and in that season, he had 39 tackles, 3 TFLs, 1 sack, and 1 forced fumble. So a guy who didn't really play too much for the Huskers, but when he did get on the field, he made his impact felt. And overall, he's now still currently playing football. He was the #1 overall draft pick in the Canadian Football League Global Draft. And as of right now, he's playing with the Edmonton Elks. And he's projected to be a starting linebacker for them this season. Now on to Isaac Gifford. Now, this was a very controversial take at the time to many Nebraska fans. He was a brother of former Nebraska linebacker Luke Gifford out of Lincoln, Nebraska. And a lot of people just thought the Huskers were taking him because of that connection. He was a very raw prospect. He had some nice physical traits, but really wasn't put together as a player. And turns out he had one of the better careers in this entire class for the Big Red. He started pretty much every single game from 2022 to 2024 and 2023. That was his best season. He was honorable mention All Big Ten at 86 total tackles, was flying all over the field. He started at Rover, at safety. He played at linebacker throughout his career for Nebraska. So a guy who was a complete utility knife and really turned out to have a solid career despite some of his physical limitations that really showed his senior year. He wasn't the speediest guy in the world. He wasn't the most athletic guy in the world. He wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but he made it count, and he signed with the Panthers this year as an undrafted free agent trying to make the roster. So Isaac Gifford, actually one of the better players, and it's funny because a lot of Nebraska fans, they were not a big fan of this addition at that point in time. Now on to Nico Cooper, who was a big-time addition for Nebraska, one of the more highly touted JUCOs in America, outside linebacker, and he played right away during his Nebraska career in 2020. He played in 7 total games, both on defense and on special teams. He had multiple electric plays where he was bowling it down on a kickoff and laid the boom on an opposing player, most notably against Ohio State, first game of the season. So a lot of the Nebraska fans, they really loved Nico Cooper. He showed a lot of flashes, but unfortunately after 2020, he entered the transfer portal, went over to Western Kentucky, spent 3 years with the Hilltoppers, and in that span had 12 total starts, 60 tackles and a sack, and now Nico Cooper is retired and no longer playing from football. Going on to Marquise Black, big-time nose tackle out of Georgia, 6'4", 280 pounds out of high school. This is a guy who was just a complete game wrecker, had some solid offers. Nebraska felt like they had a really, really good player here. In his senior year of high school, he had 73 total tackles. He had 16 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. He spent 3 years with the Cornhuskers from 2020 to 2022, and he never played a game. Just really couldn't get his body right, couldn't get his conditioning up to par, and entered the transfer portal after the 2022 season when, of course, Scott Frost was fired. Went over to Gardner-Webb, and last season for them, he had 27 total tackles and 2 sacks. In this offseason, just now actually recently, he transferred to UConn, and he's projected to start for them this year. So Marquise Black, 1 year of college left in him. On to Ronald Delancey III, one of the most iconic players in this 2020 class for Nebraska. He was a fan favorite the second he got on campus. So this was a guy who, I mean, if you just know RJ Delancey, very eccentric personality, just a guy who pretty much everybody liked. He was the first person ever to wear number 0 in Nebraska football history. He played in the majority of games in 2020 on special teams and on defense. But overall, after the 2020 season, with all of the mass exodus from the Florida boys, and we'll get to that as the video progresses, he entered the transfer portal. He went over to Toledo and spent 3 total seasons with them. He's played in almost every single game during that span and started 10 total. Most notably in 2022, was one of the better players in all of the MAC conference. He had 28 total tackles that year. And then going on to 2024, he actually transferred to the Wisconsin Badgers. He played against Nebraska last season. He played in 11 games, mostly on special teams. And then he entered the NFL draft, went undrafted, and we'll see where his career takes him, likely as a UDFA, or he might go to the UFL or the Canadian Football League. We will see. Then on to Alex Kahn, who was a big, I shouldn't say big time Nebraska commit, but somebody who was more of the underrated prospect in this class coming out of Kansas. Now, he spent 3 seasons with Nebraska from 2020 to 2022, and he never played a snap for the Big Red. Once again, a guy just couldn't get his body right. As you can see on the screen, he transferred to Iowa Western. He spent 2023 with them, played in every single game, played well, got offered a scholarship from Wyoming in 2024. Didn't play a game for them, but is projected to potentially start for the Cowboys in 2025. Now on to Marvin Scott III, somebody who had a tumultuous career with the Huskers. He was one of the most prolific Florida running backs in his high school career. He was a 5-year varsity starter since he was an 8th grader. He started on varsity. In his career, he rushed for over 7,000 yards. And for that reason, he had a lot of expectations coming into Nebraska, and he played right away. In 2020, he played in 5 total games. He had 1 start as a true freshman. In that game, he ran for 62 total yards and 2 catches for 17 as well. And then in 2021, a lot of expectations going into that year for Marvin Scott. A lot of people expected him to be the standalone starter. Did not turn out to be that way. He only played in 4 games in a way lesser role. He also dealt with injury that season for Nebraska. And then after that season with 2021, it looked like he wasn't going to start for Nebraska pretty much at all during his career. He decided to enter the portal, went over to Florida Atlantic, and just never played for them. Entered the portal once again after the 2022 season. And to this day, we do not know where he landed. It's not notable on the internet. So Marlon Scott, somebody who had a really bright start to his career, didn't turn out to be that great, and unfortunately looks like he is now retired from football. Now, this was a very hyped up Nebraska commit. Will Nixon was considered by many to be Wan'Dale Robinson 2.0, a guy who could play both running back and wide receiver for the Huskers in his senior year of high school. In Texas, he ran for over 2,000 yards, 27 total touchdowns, and he also had 300 receiving yards. Now, he came to Nebraska, a lot of expectations for him to play early, but he's tore his Achilles tendon off the bat, redshirted in 2020, had some expectations going into 2021, but only had 1 reception for the Huskers and only played in 3 games. After that season, with, of course, Nebraska only winning 3 games, entered the transfer portal, went over to Washington, in which he spent 3 years with the Huskies, and actually, he had a pretty good career with Washington. Of course, he made the national championship game. In, of course, that 3 years, he played in 32 total games, 400 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, and also had 25 receptions for 200 yards. And then it was announced this offseason that with his final year of eligibility, he has transferred to Syracuse, and he's competing to start this year for the Orange. Feldarius Payne was somebody who was also very hyped up by many Nebraska fans. Guy coming out of JUCO, and in 2 seasons with the Big Red, he played in 22 total games, most notably in 2021, where he had a bunch of sacks. He had 3 sacks that year, 4.5 tackles for loss, and a lot of people considered him to be a cornerstone of this defense going into the 2022 season. However, he had different plans. He entered the transfer portal, went over to Virginia Tech, and in 2023, he had 2 starts with 31 total tackles, and then went undrafted in the 2024 draft. Signed with the Houston Texans, actually, then went to the Indianapolis Colts, was waived just recently, and now is a free agent. He'll likely be picked up going into the year. So, well, best of luck to him throughout his NFL career. Then Jordan Riley, another JUCO prospect for the Huskers. He started off his career with North Carolina, played in a couple games, transferred over to Garden City Community College, where he had 26 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks, and was considered to be one of the better JUCOs in America. Now, Nebraska picked him up, and he spent 2020 and 2021 with the Huskers. And in that span, he actually played a lot. He played in 16 total games, 8 tackles, 1 tackle for loss. A lot of people considered him to potentially start for Nebraska in 2022. He had different plans. He entered the portal when Nebraska's defensive line coach Tony Tuioti left, and he followed him to the Oregon Ducks. And he actually played a lot for Oregon in 2022. He played in 13 games, 21 total tackles, had two tackles for loss and 1 sack. And he was actually drafted in the 2023 NFL draft in the 7th round by the New York Giants. And last year for the Giants had 12 total tackles and is in the mix to start for them. Or I shouldn't say start for them, but he will be in the mix on the defensive line for them this year. So having a pretty good NFL career. Now we get to one of the bigger success stories in this class for the Huskers, Nash Hutmacher, and it didn't look like he was going to be successful off the very bat. Now, of course, he was a dominant football player and wrestler throughout his career in South Dakota, went to Nebraska, had a lot of expectations as the polar bear, but in 2020 and 2021, he barely played, only played pretty much a few games. A lot of people considered him to potentially be a bust, but that all changed in 2022 where he played in 12 games with 2 starts, had 15 tackles that year. And then 2023, Matt Rule's first season, he was dominant, had 5 sacks, 8 tackles a loss, and 40 total tackles on the year. And last season for the Huskers as a senior, played once again in all games, started all games, had 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and then just recently signed with the Bucks as an undrafted free agent. So was one of the better players for Nebraska, a guy who was dominant at that nose tackle spot. Wish him the best of luck in the NFL. Now on to Henry Gray. We're going to start talking about some Florida boys here. Oh my goodness, this will get pretty intense. But Henry Gray was considered to be one of the best Nebraska secondary commits we've seen in over a decade. He had positional flexibility at safety, corner, nickel. He had every single offer you can imagine, whether that was from Miami, Florida State, Ohio State. But he committed to Nebraska very late in the process. It was considered to be a steal by many. Now, he committed in COVID. He showed up in May of 2020 for the first time for summer workouts, summer drills, and he decided that he did not like Nebraska. He did not like the culture here. He did not like the adjustment, of course, moving from Florida to Nebraska, and he entered the transfer portal just days after he got to Lincoln. He cited it was because of family reasons. He transferred to Florida International, did not play in 2020. In 2021, he started two total games with 10 tackles and then entered the portal going into 2022, and it is unknown where he landed. It looks like he no longer plays football. So very hyped up prospect who just didn't live up to expectations, didn't even give Nebraska a real chance with COVID going on. Now on to Logan Smothers, a very hyped up prospect coming out of Alabama. 6'2" dual threat quarterback, was a big time prospect who had over 6,000 passing yards and 50 touchdowns during his high school career. And he spent 3 years with the Big Red, of course, redshirted in 2020, played a little bit in 2021, but actually played a lot in 2022, most notably in the final game of the season versus Iowa, where he started at quarterback. Played pretty well in that ball game, but of course threw a crucial pick at the very end that cost us that one. But, throughout his career with Nebraska, considered to be a true dual threat quarterback. He passed for about 400 yards, 1 interception, and also ran for about 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, after that 2022 campaign, of course, with Scott Frost being fired, he entered the transfer portal, went over to Jacksonville State back home in Alabama. Only started 4 total games for them throughout his career in 2023 and 2024. Just didn't play as much as he thought he was, and then retired from football after last season. Now let's get to Jaden Francois, another very highly touted Florida prospect, was considered to be one of the best man-to-man corners in his class as a junior in high school. He had 12 total interceptions, just a guy with great speed, great athleticism, and a lot of Nebraska fans had high expectations for him. He flipped from Miami to Nebraska last second, but he was another prospect who COVID was going on. He showed up at Nebraska for the first time in May of 2020, and he decided that he did not like Lincoln. He, of course, was a big adjustment going from South Beach to basically Nebraska. So on one day in June, he told nobody. He went to the airport. He boarded a plane back to Florida, and he never came back, entered the portal the next day, did not tell anybody in the coaching staff, any players, and he went over to Central Florida. So again, never played at Nebraska, never played a snap, never appeared in a game. During his career with Central Florida, he was there for 2 seasons from 2020, 2021, and 2022. He had 13 starts there, then transferred to Utah State, was there from 2023 to 2024. He started every single game in his career at Utah State, had 24 total tackles, 1 interception, and 2 pass deflections. And then this offseason, with his final year of eligibility, transferred to Duke, and he's looking to start this year for the Blue Devils. So at least he's having a decent career for himself. But another guy with high potential who just didn't want to give Nebraska a chance. Now on to Omar Manning, who was arguably the most hyped up prospect in this entire class for Nebraska. 6'4" beast receiver coming out of JUCO, started his career with TCU. Now, at Nebraska, he spent 3 seasons with the Huskers before he graduated, appeared in 21 total games, had 30 receptions for only 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just didn't get on the field as much as people anticipated. Really didn't play in 2020. He was very highly touted going into 2021. Didn't play that much. And then 2022 had a lot of starts, but just really wasn't an impact player. He had some issues off the field as well with his mental health. So Omar Manning, just guy who kind of never lived up to expectations. I mean, he was a 6'4" beast receiver, but for whatever reason, just wasn't really that productive. Now on to Blaze Gunnerson, coming out of Carroll, Iowa, edge rusher for the Big Red. One guy who spent 4 seasons with the Huskers. He played in 23 total games, 14 tackles, and had only 1 sack. Just really never played for the Huskers. A guy who maybe was a little bit overrated as a prospect. It's kind of hard to evaluate these Iowa guys, but just never really started the game for the Huskers. And then after 2023, he had 2 years of eligibility remaining, but decided that he was going to enter the transfer portal. Or excuse me, he decided that he was going to retire from football completely, that this just wasn't his best interest going forward. Now on to Sevion Morrison, another very highly touted prospect for the Huskers at that running back position. In his career, coming out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, he had over 5,000 rushing yards in high school. As a senior, he ran for 2,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, and broke a lot of school records. Nebraska fans expected him to come in here, potentially start right away. Now, that unfortunately did not happen. He did not play at all in 2020. In 2021, he appeared in 7 games. He ran for over 100 yards and about 30 carries. And then after the year, he entered the transfer portal, went over to Kansas. Did not really play too much for Kansas. He was there from 2022 to 2024. He only really ran for 200 yards last season for them, entered the portal this offseason, and will spend his final year of college eligibility with Tulsa back home, where he started in high school. So I wish him the best of luck at Tulsa this season. Another guy who, again, was very hyped up, just didn't live up to expectations. Now on to Alante Brown, a very hyped up prep player for the Big Red. Guy who played both quarterback and wide receiver back in high school. And he actually played a lot for Nebraska during his career. Played in 2020, 21, and 2022. And during that span, he had 10 total starts. He had 22 receptions for 300 yards, and also was an avid kick returner for the Huskers, started there throughout 2022. So Alante Brown actually had a pretty good career, but after, of course, Scott Frost got fired, everybody got fired after that season, decided it was in his best interest to enter the transfer portal, and he went over to Michigan State in 2023, and he's been there ever since. Last season for them, he had only 2 receptions for 20 yards, had a couple injuries. That's the reason he wasn't on the field more, but he has returned to Michigan State for the 2025 season and is projected to start for the Spartans. Now getting to some of the top prospects in this class for the Huskers. This is Nadab Joseph, who was added very late for the Big Red on August 1st, right before fall camp. The Huskers added him. This is a guy who was a JUCO prospect, who's considered the number 2 JUCO prospect in America, only second to Omar Manning, who we just talked about. He was 6'2", about 200 pounds. He was a former Alabama Crimson Tide member. Of course, did not spend his career there, went over to JUCO and then went to Nebraska. But again, a lot of expectations. And over his span with the Huskers in 2020 and 2021, only appeared in 4 total games, just didn't live up to expectations, had a lot of issues off the field, as you would expect, and then entered the portal after that season, and it's unknown where he landed. Looks like he's now retired from football. On to Xavier Betts, who was the number 1 player from Nebraska in the 2020 class out of Bellevue West, was very hyped up. Over his career, he won a state championship. He had over 3,000 receiving yards, about 50 touchdown receptions. I mean, he was a big-time prospect. But Xavier Betts, at the time, he had a lot of red flags. He only had 5 total offers because of his academic issues. Now, Nebraska, they took a chance on him. They, waved all of that to the side. He went over to Nebraska, and he actually played right away. He played in every single game as both a true freshman and as a sophomore in 2020 and 2021. They got him involved in jet sweeps. They got him involved in motions. He did not learn the playbook because he wasn't really committed to the team in that aspect, but he was so talented where Scott Frost, they tried to get him on the field. During his career with the Huskers, he had 32 total receptions and 400 yards. Now, after the 2021 year, he decided that he was going to enter the transfer portal. Pretty much, I think he decided that he was going to quit football entirely and did not play at all during 2022. And then going into 2023, when Matt Rhule was hired by Nebraska, he decided he wanted to come back to the Huskers. Matt Rhule allowed him to come back. For that reason, he was hyped up. A lot of Nebraska fans thought that Xavier Betts was going to start for the Huskers in 2023. And then very quickly, he was kicked out. He quit the team, decided that it was not in his best interest to play football anymore. He did not play at all in 2023 for the Huskers. He retired from football entirely. And ever since then, Xavier Betts has been arrested multiple times for misdemeanors, for possession, for expired licenses, and a couple other issues. So, again, you wish Xavier Betts the best of luck. Hopefully he can figure out his life off the field. Just never worked out for Nebraska. Now on to Marcus Fleming, another big-time wide receiver prospect, this time out of Miami, Florida. A guy who had a bunch of big-time offers but committed to Nebraska very late in the prospect at Miami Northwestern. In his final year of high school, had about 1,000 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns, and won a state title. He was also a big-time kick returner. And at Nebraska, he actually played right away. In 2020, he played in 4 total games, the first 4 games against Northwestern. Well, he led the team in receiving yards with 5 total receptions with 75 yards, and honestly was dominating that game for the Huskers. But after that Northwestern game, he never played again. There were a lot of off-the-field issues with Marcus Fleming. Wasn't showing up on time, wasn't doing all the right things. And for that reason, after the season, he entered the transfer portal. He went over to Maryland, spent 2021 and 2022 with the Terrapins. Played a little bit in 2021, had about 200 receiving yards, and then 2022 was kicked off the team due to an assault charge, and then looks like he no longer plays football. So again, wish him the best of luck off the field. Very, very explosive prospect who did play for Nebraska, just had a lot of issues off the field. Now on to Keyshawn Green, another Florida guy, this time coming out of Crawfordville, Florida. 6'3" outside linebacker, 200 pounds, big time prospect. Again, throughout his career as a senior in high school, he had 150 tackles, 3 sacks, and 1 interception. He enrolled at Nebraska in June of 2020, but once again, another guy who just did not like Lincoln for whatever reason, did not like being here around that COVID period, and entered the portal in September of 2020, did not appear in a single game, was once again kind of showing up late to practice as well. He transferred to Florida Atlantic very quickly, and he never played a game for them, entered the portal just a year later, and it's unknown where he landed, if he even plays football anymore. But that was a guy who just, once again, super talented, just did not work out. And then the last player for Nebraska, a guy who's considered to be one of the best prospects the Huskers have landed in over a decade at the time. This is Turner Corcoran, coming out of Lawrence, Kansas. He was a borderline 5-star prospect, had, every single offer you can imagine. Alabama was trying to get him. Georgia was trying to get him. But Nebraska, this was considered a huge recruiting win. But unfortunately, throughout his Nebraska career, just did not live up to expectations. In 2020, as a true freshman, he played right away. He was the first true freshman to start at left tackle in Nebraska history. In 2021, he played in every single game. In 2022, he played in every single game. But in that span, just did not really play well. He played left tackle, right tackle. They kicked him into guard. They just were trying to find a role for him. Again, he's a guy who was good enough to start for Nebraska, but he just wasn't really that good when he got on the field. Now, during Matt Rule's tenure and starting in 2023, he started the first 7 games before a season-ending injury, and then, of course, in 2024, only started 4 games, really did not play that well, and then, of course, got injured again, redshirted, and he will be back in 2025, fighting to start. Looks like it's probably not going to happen. So another guy who injuries have been a part of his career as of late, but just really never lived up to expectations when he was on the field. All right, guys. Wow, that was Nebraska's entire 2020 class. It was so hyped up at the time. There were so many big-time 4-star prospects. It was considered to be Scott Frost's revolutionary class. But at that point in time, when all those players left and never turned out to be anything, that's when you knew that Scott Frost was not going to be a great coach here at Nebraska. And unfortunately, even though a lot of these guys had good offers and good rankings out of high school, those rankings really don't take into account how good they are off the field and how committed they are to a team. That was pretty evident because there were a lot of busts there. So let me know your thoughts down below. Who were you surprised about that actually had a good career outside of Nebraska? Who are you thankful that Nebraska landed? Let me know in the comment section. If you enjoy history videos like this, please let me know. I'll make more videos just like this. As always, folks, go grab, go on my roll, hit that like button and subscribe, and see you in the next one.